Halo, selamat malam teman-teman. Hey,
Hi,
halo. Hai Adam. Halo Mas
got my
Adam, selamat
badge.
pagi. Awesome. Thank you, thank you. Cool, cool. Yeah, Adam has been with us since the first inception, no, not conception of the festival. So thank you for your support all these times, Adam.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, and I'm so sorry that I wasn't able to join an hour ago.
Mhm.
But you know, the engineers have been working hard, and they've had spanners out, and they've had all their tools, and they've been furiously getting us back online. So so we're ready to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, what have you been up to since you've moved away from Indonesia? I've known you since because back then you lived here in Jakarta, and
Indeed.
when you were still with British Council. So, what have you been up to since?
I've been up to all sorts of things. Basically, I decided to take some time out and try and sort out more of my own life, and and um, and then the pandemic came along
All
and
right. Yeah.
complicated everything. And of course, the pandemic had a huge impact, especially on the world of the arts world.
True.
And so I've been doing some various different freelance producing and consulting
I see.
roles, and including occasionally for British Council. Um,
Okay.
but um, and and then for the last 6 months, I've been doing part-time um, producing work as one of a team of producers for Shout Festival in Birmingham, which is a LGBTQ plus arts festival in Birmingham that's been going since 2009, and which we're going to talk about. But
Cool.
I've also been spending quite a lot of time in the USA for personal personal reasons,
Right.
and so and I'm going to be spending quite a lot more time over here over the next couple of years, probably.
I see. So you're still, you're becoming the citizen of the world currently, yeah?
I'm absolutely. Well, I thought as I've only lived in Britain and India and Indonesia, I need another country to get to know. You know, so
Right.
um, it wasn't not enough yet. Yeah, I know. No, but I always have Indonesia in my heart everywhere I go.
Thank you. And whenever you come by, please do come over to our side. And yeah.
Yeah, and I always tell people about 100% Manusia. My Indonesian gets worse and worse every day. Um, tapi saya selalu berbicara tentang 100%
Ah,
Manusia Festival, because people all over the world, they're interested in talking about ideas, particularly ideas of intersectionality. But I've still not seen a better example
ah,
of intersectional um, identities are being explored, and allies being created across different minority groups. I've still not seen a better example than
ah.
100% Manusia. So you
Terima
guys are,
kasih.
yeah, you guys are leading the world as far as I'm concerned.
Well, hopefully there'll be more initiatives, you know, um, along that line, because we do need that kind of intersection intersectionality, because if if um, we're facing our own issues by ourselves, that could take forever. But if we help each other out, that could uh, lighten the burden a bit, I suppose. Right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So,
yeah,
well, since
absolutely.
well, you've mentioned about shout. Maybe you would like to tell us a bit more about that. I mean, since tonight's uh, I because I'm sorry I didn't introduce the session properly because. But yeah, hi everyone. Hold on, I'll do that. I'll do that now. So hi everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. So tonight's guest speaker is Adam Pushkin. Like he already introduced himself just now, and our topic of the night is programming films, or probably also art pieces and art performances, in your case, right, Adam, on gender issues. So yeah, that's what we're gonna discuss and talk about tonight. And yeah, so you mentioned that you've been involved with Shout. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so Shout Festival has been going for 12 years, and it's in my home city of Birmingham. So I grew up in Birmingham, and many people will have said over the years, many people will have had to endure me going on about Birmingham because it's a city that doesn't tend to capture headlines around the world. At least it didn't until Peaky Blinders came along, and now a lot of people watch Peaky Blinders. And that's set in Birmingham, and all the actors put on Birmingham accents. So Shout Festival has been going. So I grew up in Birmingham, and my folks still live there. So even though I've moved around the world, Birmingham was always a place that I went back to very regularly. And the festival was set up in 2009 by an LGBT community organization. And the organization was originally set up to offer services and specifically for LGBT people in the city. So recognizing that there are things like health services, or things like support for asylum seekers or domestic violence victims, or just community organizing functions and community facilities that are specifically provided for LGBT people and designed around the needs of LGBT people. So that's the organization that set it up. And then in 2009, really the organization's aim was to make Birmingham a better city in which to be lesbian or gay or bi or trans. And so some of the people involved in that organization, along with some artists and some arts professionals, thought, well, actually, one of the ways that we can make Birmingham a better city to be lesbian or gay or bi or trans is to have an arts festival celebrating LGBT life and LGBT culture. And so that's when Shout started. And really there was a desire to offer something different from the commercial gay scene, and the Pride, the annual Pride event, which is great fun. It's also, in fact, it's happening right now in Birmingham. It's this weekend. Cool. Happy Pride Birmingham, everybody. But there was a desire to offer an alternative to the commercial world, and to have a broader range and a more diverse range of artistic activities, and also to bring LGBT culture into mainstream spaces and mainstream organizations. So the mainstream theaters and art galleries and performance venues, for a long time, they wanted to embrace LGBT culture, but they didn't necessarily have the specialist knowledge to be able to do that well. So Shout as a festival enabled mainstream organizations to be able to program LGBT work that was that helped them to do that. So over the years, the festival's changed quite a lot. It's evolved. It's had quite different sort of styles, different focuses. One year they ran a specific film festival, 1 or 2 years. But normally it's been all sorts of art forms, and with a heavy emphasis on performing arts.
I see.
And but also over the last 12 years, the context has shifted quite a lot. I'm really interested in talking maybe about how the context has been shifting in Indonesia and how it's been shifting in the UK. But I certainly noticed that nowadays queer voices are very widespread in mainstream culture in the UK.
Yeah.
You know, we just launched. We just had Strictly Come Dancing launched last night. It's the biggest, most fun, popular show, and there's a same-sex dancing couple on Strictly Come Dancing in the UK this year, and there was one last year as well. And you know, Netflix is full of shows with queer storylines. So across the mainstream, there's now a much broader representation of queer voices, but in the West Midlands, it still doesn't necessarily feel to LGBTQ plus communities in the region that their voices necessarily get heard. They don't. People don't necessarily see themselves represented because their stories are local and their stories are unique. So only a small segment of queer communities get to be a part of that, and to some extent, you know, queer representation is still dominated by certain groups, and so part of the focus of Shout is trying to give communities opportunities to tell stories and explore the diversity of the region and of the region's LGBTQ plus communities, and the huge kaleidoscopic diversity within those communities. So that's why. So this year we've been exploring queer heavy metal culture, for example, and we've got an event. So there's a lot of people who don't necessarily see themselves represented in what you might think of as traditional LGBT programs or queer programs, but actually there are really interesting subcultures that we try and enable people to bring out, and at the same time we try to make sure that there are really diverse stories being represented in the festival. So yeah, so that's what Shout is. As I say, it's cross art form, it's performance, it's exhibitions, it's installations, it's films, it's literature, events, it's everything really, dance and theatre and so on. This year, of course, the other thing that's happened this year is because of the pandemic. Last year's event was entirely online. This year we're just excited to have the opportunity to have a festival at all. So it's just there's really a sense of just returning, and you know, we're all very grateful to be able to actually have festivals, and there will be some elements that are also online as well, now that we've learned more about how audiences like to engage with arts online. It's not a replacement for face-to-face activities. It can be a bonus, or it can be an alternative, and it can be another way of creating artistic interventions and artistic connection.
Right. Yes. I mean, I guess the same with us, because we also had to shift to an online program for last year and also this year, actually. Well, Britain as well, Europe, I guess. You guys are already having concerts, and also cinemas opened for you guys. So congratulations on that too. So that's why I guess festivals are now also they're also being held offline, I guess, not just online anymore. So yeah, that's
But still there are people in the UK. I mean, the COVID hasn't gone away, and although the vaccines are very effective, and you know, get your jabs, everybody, if you can. The vaccines are very effective, but the risk hasn't gone away entirely, and there are a lot of audiences who feel very nervous or feel very anxious, and quite justifiably so in many cases. And so it is important that those of us who are trying to create opportunities for people to engage and connect with communities, and to learn stories and do all the things that arts festivals can do, enable people to it's quite important that we all enable people to participate in whatever way they choose to, and it's always been the case that actually a live events festival there's a lot of people who can't participate in that, whether that's for reasons of geography, if they don't live in the same place, or whether it's through through disability, or whether it's for reasons of just not having the time at the particular time that the event is on. So it is really important to try and be as creative as possible about enabling people to take part in events in whatever way suits them. And I mean, we're trying our best this year, and we're kind of at the start of a journey of learning how to do that as effectively as possible.
Yeah, that sounds great, actually.
And how is it for you? Are you back to are you able to do any face-to-face events at the moment, or are you entirely online?
So right now the cinema is opening again, but still with I think 50% capacity, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Actually 3 months ago we already had the cinemas open, but then it was closed down again because the numbers were getting higher. So the cinemas and theaters closed down, and then we had another semi-lockdown situation in Jakarta, in Java and Bali, I think, if I'm not mistaken, because it's more concentrated in Java and Bali. But other areas outside of Java, Bali, some also commenced their own semi-lockdown, because I guess people from Java and Bali also travel to those places, so the numbers over there are also rising. So I guess they also did their precautions and mitigation. So but right now the number seems to be going down a bit, I think, or probably a little bit more. So I think malls are opening again, schools are opening again. They're trying these shift method, where some classes go on Mondays, some classes go on Tuesdays, and so on. I think just to connect the students to their school. And vaccinations are still going on. The vaccinations for the teens are already in progress. I guess we're waiting for vaccinations for children now, probably in a few months from now. But I think, the jabs were, because Indonesia is such a large country and there's many people in different areas, so I guess it takes a bit longer than other countries to vaccinate most of Indonesians. But I think hopefully we'll get there sooner than later. But with the cinemas opening, I think it's also a good sign that probably maybe next year some festivals would be offline. I know some festivals in Bali, they, like Minikino, they already they still have their offline festival, but not everyone can have that opportunity. But so usually most of us stick to the online festival format for now. And you mentioned about the Shout initiative. So of course I'm thinking about that's basically art, or activism through art, right? Because what you're bringing to the public spaces or to the public audience is, basically you have a message with all the art that you curate. And has the message been, and you've always said that it has shifted back then when it started and now. Can you tell us a bit more how it has shifted? Because I know that England and probably most of Europe, in terms of legality and also public acceptance towards the LGBT community, it's already pretty progressive.
Yeah.
I mean, compared to probably Southeast Asian countries and such. Maybe can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, well, it's certainly the political context, or the socio-political context has got easier for many people, though not necessarily for everybody. I mean, I remember when I was at college in the mid to late 90s, and I first got involved in activism around, well, in those days we weren't even, to our shame, we weren't even talking about the T. We were just talking about LGB, because nobody was paying attention to the T in those days. And we had an unequal age of consent. We had a ban on any out people in the military. We had a law that's in the UK. We had a law that said that school teachers couldn't tell children it was okay to be gay. We had no adoption rights and things like that. So we never even contemplated the idea that it might be okay to have, you know, same-sex marriage or anything like that. I mean, that was just off the scale. And that was only 25 years ago. I mean, I know it's a long time since I was at college, because I'm a really old person, but it was only 25 years ago. So it is, so the scale of legal change and the context that we're operating in has been amazing, and that's happened in a lot of countries around the world, although obviously not all, but it doesn't necessarily happen for everybody, and there is still a lot of homophobic violence. I mean, just a few weeks ago in the centre of Birmingham, there was a vicious attack on a gay couple in the gay village, and so, you know, there is still homophobic violence. There is still a lot, there is still a lot of abuse and violence against trans people, and there is still, and sometimes the way in which trans rights have become a sort of culture war has been extremely unpleasant for trans people in our communities, and of course there are many people who don't necessarily have access to the sorts of you know, the many people who aren't necessarily living in environments that are affirming LGBTQ plus life. So what we are, a lot of what we're doing as a festival is to try to, I suppose, enable artists and communities to respond to whatever context they find themselves in, and to recognize that the context is very different for different people, and different people coming from very different backgrounds. And the West Midlands is Birmingham and the West Midlands is a very, very diverse place. But also sometimes it's about sort of, it's about making specific offers and saying specific things, and saying that, you know, we're interested in artists who are talking about X, Y, and Z. But often it's about listening to artists and trusting artists and being willing to be led by artists, and sometimes offering provocations, sometimes saying, okay, here's a thing, what do you think about it? But then the artists will go and run off and do something totally different, and that might be far better than anything we could have thought of as curators. Artists often want to tell stories informed by their own lived experience, and that's one of the things where a festival like Shout involves a lot of people telling stories that are informed by their own personal lived experience, and that's why it's really important to have a diverse range of artists represented in the festival. But it's also important that artists are able to use their own lived experience to create something, I suppose, that can be accessible, that can connect with a broader range of the community as well. So the context in Birmingham is, yeah, it's definitely very different from how it was 25 years ago. That's also one of the reasons why we're so interested in something that doesn't necessarily get talked about a lot in festivals, but is older people. Yes. And intergenerational stories and the exchange of stories between younger people and older people is something that we're very interested in. And we've got a couple of projects that we started off this year, and we hope to be able to kind of make them bigger and more ambitious next year. But because the experience of course, for anybody who's growing up who's not straight, growing up is a hugely important time of life, and the experience growing up for somebody who is 20 years older than me, who's 65, was radically different from the experience of somebody growing up 20 years younger than me in the UK, and in a lot of the world. And so it's about trying to create some sort of conversations between those communities. And often it's the case that 25-year-olds and 65-year-olds don't necessarily have the opportunity to talk to each other that much about their experiences, and to share stories and to exchange ideas and even to collaborate. So it's one of the things that we're quite interested in exploring more and more, is how to bridge that divide, and how to enable younger people to learn from older people's experiences, but also older people to learn from younger people's perspectives and voices. So that's one of the things that's very interesting to us. But I'm interested also in how the context has evolved in Indonesia, and how you see. I mean, I have my own perspectives, having lived there for a few years, but how you see the context as having evolved, and to what extent. I mean, I'm very aware. I remember vividly, almost 5 years ago now, the last Q Film Festival, which was called The Absence of a Rainbow. Oh no, it was called, yeah. Was it called The Absence of a Rainbow?
The Absence of Rainbow, yeah.
Yeah, The Absence of a Rainbow. I remember, and it had this beautiful black and white imagery. It was and
of a unicorn.
Yeah, of a unicorn, exactly. A unicorn with no. And I remember that vividly, and I thought that was such a powerful image. But I'm very interested to get your sense of how the context has evolved in Indonesia, and whether the change that's happened in Europe and America has impacted on Indonesia positively or possibly negatively.
Well, that is a bit tricky, because I mean, the way I see it, from on one side, from if I see artworks, whether it's film, whether it's performance arts, or sorry, or other types of arts, basically. Actually, the topic of queer art is actually more present over the past years, I think. And they've also managed to be exhibited also alongside mainstream art, I think. Well, maybe, I mean, well, art, I mean, if you talk about art itself in Indonesia, it's a bit tricky, because there's pop culture, Indonesian pop culture, and then there's art where, when I like in the cultural sense of having art exhibitions and whether it's film or perform arts or other types of arts. But if we talk about pop culture, there's been a shift where if 10 years ago it was actually all right to talk about queer issues or portray queer characters in pop culture. Now it's not as okay as back then, but I've seen a lot of more positive representations in films, in indie films, and also in other types of art other than pop culture. Because, and there's also I think there's a gap where I don't know, the status quo, or they still want to give the image that Indonesia is friendly for everyone, but we know that minorities aren't usually represented or aren't usually included in many of many policies or any of the important issues, and probably not even welcomed in the public spaces. So, but also I see online, well, maybe this is just my personal observation, but online on Twitter or maybe on Instagram and also on YouTube, I guess, I've seen more influencers, I don't know, social media influencers and such that are more LGBT friendly, I guess, or they are outspoken about being allies, and also I think I've also seen some queer content on TikTok. I think that's been well, of course, it has negative responses, but also positive responses. So I mean.
Yeah.
That's and it's actually pretty balanced, I guess, whether the negative and the positive response. So I don't know if that. I guess it's maybe a good thing that not all the responses are negative, but that's one way to look at it. But yeah, there's been a shift how the formal spaces treat the queer issues, but also how actually in if you see it as a social context, many people are actually okay with it, but of course that doesn't translate in like legal protections or those kind of things, sadly. But hopefully we will get there one step at a time. Yeah.
One of the things that's really we were talking before about the balance between online and offline, or online and live events. One of the potential advantages of online events is that, of course, or online artistic activities, that they enable anonymity. They enable people to be anonymous, and of course, I mean, in the world of politics and security states and everything, they don't like online anonymity, and we can understand why. But also anonymity is sometimes incredibly important. If you have a story to tell, but you don't necessarily want everybody to know who you are. You don't necessarily want your employer or your family to know that's your story. And so one of the challenges, I suppose, for us as festivals is to create opportunities for people to, both as artists, as communities, as audiences, to be able to engage with things in the way that those artists and audiences feel comfortable. And sometimes that will be about nobody knowing that they're there, or nobody knowing that artist is them.
Right.
So creating the opportunity to be anonymous, I think is really valuable, and helps people to find the wherewithal to be able to tell stories. But also I'm very conscious. I've been spending a bit of time recently talking to Queer Indonesia Archive about whose focus is, a lot of their focus is on the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, and that struck me as and they've been creating sort of online exhibitions based on, if QIA team are in the house, hi. And they've been creating various online exhibitions based on archival materials that have been gathered of queer life in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And I found that really interesting, because it's in a way, it's kind of reclaiming that time and trying to articulate something about the things that were sometimes possible in that time that might not feel possible now. And I think trying to communicate to audiences a sense that, that was not that long ago in the greater scheme of things, and that there was a time when, when queer life felt a bit easier, perhaps in Jakarta, at least easier than it does now. And maybe maybe it's not that outlandish to imagine that those times might return. But it feels like a very valuable form of storytelling. And as I mentioned, it's also about comparing different generations, and it's one of the reasons why we're very interested in it. But one of the things that we're trying to do in Birmingham is to sort of to use queer as a verb, to think about it grammatically, to queer things that have not necessarily previously been queer. And that applies to film program, can apply to film programming as well as to other sorts of events. So some of it's about spaces, about physical geographical spaces, that people, sometimes if you look on the map of Birmingham, it will say gay village around a couple of streets in central Birmingham. But actually there are all sorts of spaces that have at one point held queer stories, or have been meaningful in all sorts of hidden ways that have not necessarily been very well documented, or have not necessarily become part of the mainstream sense of those places. That have not been recorded on a map anywhere. But it's one of the things that, and I know that that's the case in Jakarta as well, and I'm sure in other cities in Indonesia, is that there are places that are meaningful for queer communities that the rest of the community might not know about. And so part of the thing that we can do as a festival is to try to claim those places, and to try to say, no, actually, there are queer stories all over the place. It's just that our culture hasn't been paying attention to them. And it's I suppose in a way it's almost one of the things that we might occasionally do as programmers is to try to question and challenge people's perceptions of what might constitute queer. So there's a wonderful movie from 50 years ago called Harold and Maude, which some of you may know. It's a cult classic movie, and I keep being distracted by the list of people who are joining and thinking, oh, hiya. There's a wonderful movie called Harold and Maude, which is an intergenerational love story, and between a 79-year-old woman and a boy who's in his early 20s. And it's so transgressive, and it's so challenging of the mainstream. That as far as we're concerned, it's a queer movie, but we're creating an event around it, and it's got wonderful songs by Cat Stevens as well, which we can sing along to. So as far as we're concerned, it's a queer movie, and we're including it in our festival. So we're very. I think it's very. Sometimes it's useful to be able to put things in a different context and to think about things from a different perspective, and even when we talk about programming films, sometimes the festival that you include a film in allows you to think about that film in a different way. Allows you to focus on different aspects of its storytelling than you would otherwise have done if it wasn't in that festival. I don't know whether is that something that you think I don't know whether that's something also that applies to 100% Manusia, whether you're to what extent are you ticking boxes that say, okay, we need some movies about women's rights, and we need some movies about LGBT rights, we need some movies about disability rights, or are you able to sort of bring broader stories that people might not necessarily expect there to be in the 100% Manusia festival?
Well, we actually do try that because, if we're speaking about minorities in Indonesia, there's actually a large variety of groups that are included in that context, I suppose. Not just the LGBT community, but there's also religious minorities, where in Indonesia there are still many people who have local religions. Maybe not local, supposedly indigenous religions, but currently but currently their rights as a citizen are not properly met because of their beliefs. because it's not their religion is not the six main religions that are recognized by the government. So
Yes.
that's also an issue that we've brought up in our festival. And then there's well, of course, women's issues, because, well, I mean, that's always that's still an issue, I think, everywhere.
Of course. Yeah.
And then there's children's issue also, and there's disability issues, where disability issues we can it includes people with disabilities that can be seen. I'm not sure what the English term for it is, but also people with who are neurodivergent, because neurodivergent people sometimes they don't see. They're not seen as people with disabilities because they're not recognized as such. And yeah, I mean, and also that's why we also bring the issue of mental health in our festival, because that's also a right as for us as citizens, and it's also something that concerns us as human beings also. So I guess
Absolutely.
I really understand. I mean, I really relate with your the queering concept of your festival, because I do think that we do something that's similar to that, but we don't really have a name for it. But actually, there's actually a question here from Lincoln, I think. And she's asking, how long was the programming process for you during the whole pandemic situation, especially, and how did you create the arts that you were about to exhibit?
Yeah. So the context in Britain is that we've been kind of hesitantly emerging from the pandemic, and nobody's been really quite sure how it would go. And even different organizations still have different policies right now. Some venues are very strict, and other venues are quite kind of relaxed. And so we as a festival, we don't have our own venue. We have to work with other people's venues. And so everything we have to do is a collaboration with other people's venues. So last year, there were different people involved in the festival last year, but the festival was entirely online. And in fact, it took place during the second national lockdown in November 2020. So it was entirely online, it was entirely at home, and the festival then it had quite a substantial film program, because films are obviously a format that people can engage with online.
Right.
But it also had quite a number of small commissions for performances to be created, to be shared online, and from local artists. And it had a number of talk events which happened online as well. And so, and I think for a lot of people, and one of the things that we found in evaluating that festival was that there were audiences who really appreciated, particularly at the time of the pandemic, so many people were, it was emotionally hugely stressful for everybody. I'm sure that's the same in Indonesia, that the periods of lockdown were incredibly stressful for so many people. And so and especially for LGBTQ plus people for whom a sense of community is in many cases, is really paramount, is really hugely important. The ability to be able to connect online, and to be able to feel like you're part of a community again, was massively important. And some of the things that people said on the evaluation forms was really quite kind of quite tear-jerking, actually, quite profound. So we're now in the situation in the UK where, as I mentioned, venues are open, events are happening, but a lot of people aren't quite sure. A lot of people are still quite nervous. Those people who are going out are, you can go to nightclubs, they're open, and you can go to gigs, and they're full. But there's a lot of people that are still not sure about whether that's a good idea. And understandably, you know, we still have well over 100 people dying of COVID every day in the UK. So it's not like the problem has gone away. It's just that it doesn't seem to be now getting any worse. It's not necessarily getting better either. It's just not getting any worse. So the process of programming, I mean, really we started about last, in earnest, we only started in April. Now, we ideally would have started earlier, but I wasn't really involved in Shout until March.
Okay.
So we started in about April, and it started with a mixture of reaching out to different partners who we had connections with and saying, should we do something together? And having some conversations about that, and especially partners in Birmingham who focus on different forms of art. So, for instance, there's a crafts organisation in Birmingham that are interested in that. We're setting up a project exploring the intergenerational conversations, bringing together young and older queer people through crafts. And there's an organisation that are working with us on that. And there's a local theatre company that we're working with, and there's as I mentioned, the heavy metal project. There's a particular Birmingham organisation that's particularly focused on that, and there's a South Asian arts organisation, and we've co-commissioned 2 new dance pieces with them. So there's a number of projects that were developed with other partners, but then also we issued an open call to which we publicised as widely as we could to artists to come to us with ideas. And we got a lot of ideas. We got, I think, over 70 different submissions from our open call for ideas for the festival. And a lot of the rest of the festival has come from the things that people sent to us. And where sometimes they came from Birmingham and West Midlands, and sometimes they came from much further away. So we have a team of different producers, and some of the ways that the open call works is not necessarily just taking a project and taking it lock, stock and barrel, taking all of it, but is to sort of say, well, there's an interesting idea, and there's another interesting idea we heard of over there, and there's that partner over there who are quite interested in something similar. So let's try and pull this all together into one really exciting thing that nobody individually would have thought of. So sometimes the open call process is not just about finding specific pieces of artwork, but it's also about creating ideas that can then be combined with other ideas to create something in a festival.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, but we're now at the stage where ideally, we would start much earlier, and I think now we can start planning a bit more confidently for next year. You know, this time last year, we had no way of planning confidently for 2021. But now we are able to plan a bit more confidently for 2022, and also quite a number of artists delayed their own activities, particularly sort of artists that, you know, that they know they want to make something for an in-person theatre. They didn't know that was going to be possible this year, so people have delayed things for next year. So a lot of the planning really should start now for a festival next November, so this year is more rushed than we would have liked, but that's the impact of COVID and creating all the uncertainty.
Right. Yes. I agree with that. I guess that's why, I mean, for our festival, we also had, we usually start planning early in the year, in the beginning of the year, but we had plan A, plan B, plan C. So there was a time that we were still optimistic that we would have an offline festival for this year. But seeing how the trend is in August, I think we finally just made a decision that, okay, this year we're going online, just so that it would be easier for our planning and to have our program ready for the time that it will be, that it would be on, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so I'm fascinated to know whether there are any questions in the.
Well, there's I know that people have been shouting out to you. There's Irma, I think, and then there's some other people. I'm sorry, Irma also said, pakai bahasa Indonesia dong. So, yes.
Ya, masih ada sedikit bahasa Indonesia, tapi sekarang saya di New York dan bahasa Indonesia enggak ada di sini. Maaf ya.
Sudah lama tidak mengobrol dengan bahasa Indonesia.
Yeah. But if there are any dancers in the house, I know there was a dancer in the house earlier, but I don't know if she's still around. I just wanted to say part of the reason I'm 24 hours ago I was preparing to join my first ever Limon class. So these are some of the things that I'm now able to do is to join outdoor Limon classes, which Limon is one of the great modern dance techniques. And hoping to do some more of that, and maybe bring my once I've mastered the Limon technique, I shall bring it back to Jakarta, and we can do it around Monas maybe.
Oh, all right. I will be waiting for that day.
With the special 100% Manusia dance commission all around, outdoors.
Okay. Yes, you've heard it first, dear everyone. We will wait for Adam's program for the Limon class in Monash.
Absolutely. I shall dance for you yet.
Yes. I will put that. I will pencil that in, and we will see when we can squeeze that in one of our festivals, probably next year or the next year after that. We will.
Absolutely.
We will do that.
I look forward to coming to you with more ridiculous ideas that you have to politely find a way to say no to. But I also was very interested in the ways in which 100% Manusia, as you've described, is about to some extent building allies across different diverse groups, and the ways in which you have been able to bring stories of gender and sexuality and stories of religion together, and I know I'm interested in this. This is something that we're very interested in Birmingham. We have a actually, I want to just mention a story. One of the LGBT stories from Birmingham that gained the biggest attention nationally was 2 years ago. There was a primary school in Birmingham that had an LGBT inclusive education project, and they were teaching kids about all sorts of different sorts of families. And there was a small number of protesters who didn't like this, and who decided to protest against it, and it became this huge culture war issue, and it became very unpleasant and not something that we want to be. We want to represent Birmingham. But what it meant was that it led to a situation in which queer rights and sexual and gender diversity and religious diversity were being placed in opposition to one another, and that it was being portrayed in the press that there was a conflict, if you like, in particular between Islam and LGBTQ rights, and Birmingham has a very large Islamic communities, and one of the things that we're very keen to do with Shout is to challenge the notion that there is some kind of conflict there, and to build alliances and to find ways of ensuring that the festival represents all of the LGBTQ plus perspectives in the West Midlands, which includes embracing the very large number of people for whom religion is very important in their lives. And so I'm interested in whether in Sebuah Manusia you have found ways of being able to bring those sorts of perspectives together.
Well, I know that it's not us that's doing this type of what would you call it, initiative, but we have collaborated with organizations that has been doing that for several years. I think you remember there's a theological school, a philosophical and theological school in Jakarta, and they're still doing that. I mean, they're still doing that. I think I saw Pak Suleiman somewhere in the audience tonight. So, hello, Pak. Yeah, they're still doing that, and also I think there has been smaller initiatives that I've seen around, but in 100%, I think I think for at least these 2 years when we're online, last year when we were online, and we haven't had the chance to do so, because if we would have that, we would usually have the security measures so that to ensure that everyone have a safe space and all that. So we're not sure about doing that in an online forum for now, but in the past, usually we if we have those kind of conversations, it would be in a closed, or not a closed space, but usually in a venue where we can make sure that everyone there feels safe to speak out their minds, and also that everyone who is present also can regard the other audience members, and also respect their perspective, not just us being defensive about what we believe in. So I think for that it was easier to do it on an offline setting when we are face to face instead of an online setting. And also we haven't really had. I don't remember having like a specific discussion or event on that particular subject, but it does come across during the post-screening discussions, because yes, usually some of the films that we show talk about religion, also talk about family, talk about core issues. So usually it comes up in those discussions, but I don't think we have had that particular specific issue brought up in one event or discussion setting. But it does come up sporadically in the post-screening discussions. Sorry.
That's really interesting, and I guess that's one of the great things about a film festival is that you can put these films out there, and then people will interpret them in the context of their own lived experience, and will bring then their own lived experience to bear in the discussion afterwards, and that's where sometimes it's most powerful. But also it's one of the reasons why I really admire your festival is that it can bring these very different stories into one festival, and with one overarching message and narrative. I always found that the message of Seratus Manusia, or the message of embracing diversity, felt like it in Indonesia. It was very there was a great deal of in some senses, I mean, every government office has Bhinneka Tunggal Ika written underneath the Garuda,
Yeah.
So positioning all forms of diversity within the same umbrella, I think is a very powerful thing to do, and to hopefully communicate the message that that all human beings are worth celebrating, and that all forms of diversity are to be celebrated, is a very powerful thing. So fantastic. I will continue to. I will going around New York today with my Sebuah Manusia badge, proudly displayed, and tell everybody about the festival.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, there's been also people commenting and I think giving kudos for your shirt today, your Hello Kitty shirt.
It's from Indonesia, and it was a beautiful gift. It was a beautiful gift from a friend when I left Jakarta, and I don't know whether she's here, but I'm very grateful and wear it proudly, and it's my best clubbing top.
Awesome. Clubbing. Okay. Yeah, I could actually see that. Yeah. Well, let me check. I don't think there are any more questions for now. But I guess if people would have more questions, can they reach out to you on your Instagram, probably?
Yeah, please do. Or you can contact me on email. I'm very easy to find. I have an unusual name, so I'm very easy to track down online. If you want to track me down.
Right.
I'm very easy to get hold of. But yeah, and we are, as far as Shout Festival goes, we are screening a notable Indonesian movie in our festival this year, which we're very excited about, which is Memories of My Body. And
good movie,
absolutely. And we will also be interested in, and we're also keen to develop further collaborations with Indonesia. And we've got a project which hopefully we'll be able to do in time for February, which is the LGBT History Month in the UK. And which is a collaboration with Queer Indonesia Archive, and we're very keen to collaborate further with Indonesia. So watch this space.
Awesome.
And please get in touch if you want to talk to us about ideas for the future, because we're very keen to have discussions with anybody from all over the world.
Yeah. So anyone who would like to have Adam probably as your speaker or somewhere, maybe you could also reach out to him. I don't know, but Adam, I personally know Adam as someone who is really great to talk to and discuss about these things. So yeah, I would recommend him, guys.
Terima kasih banyak, and selamat untuk festivalnya, and I wish you all the best of luck for the rest of the festival this year, and sorry for the terrible Wi-Fi problem I had this morning.
It's okay. Those things happened, and yeah, hopefully your festival also runs smoothly, and hopefully we can have a collaboration sometime in the future. I'm looking forward to that, and you in Monas especially that. Yeah, so
absolutely. Okay,
so everyone, thank you for tonight. Thank you, Adam, for dropping by and talking with us, discussing with us, and I guess we'll see you again, everyone, in 2 weeks' time. Please watch this space, as Adam has said, and go ahead and follow him, and also follow Shout. Maybe you would like to tell the audience the social media for the.
Absolutely, we're Shout Festival on Instagram. We're Shout Festival on Twitter. Unfortunately, I don't think we're on TikTok. We're too old for that. But but yeah, you can follow us, Shout Festival on Instagram, and please come and follow us. And there'll be lots of exciting things coming up in November. We've already started sort of gradually announcing bits of the program. We'll be announcing more over the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. So good luck to you guys also, and yeah, hopefully we stay healthy despite the pandemic, and hopefully we can celebrate life again as normal as possible in probably next year. So thank you for tonight, everyone. Yeah, yeah.
One day I'll see you again face to face before too long, hopefully.
Hopefully, yes. Okay. Yeah, I wait for that day. Okay then. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Selamat malam. Selamat pagi untukmu. Have a good day. Yes. Have a nice weekend, everyone, and have a great Monday ahead in front of you. Terima kasih dan selamat malam.
Makasih.
Terima kasih.